Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Rosa DiDonato.
And I'm Marian Leary.
And you're listening to Amplify Nursing, a Penn nursing podcast supported by the Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Amplify Nursing features nurses who are leading the way in science, policy, and innovation.
Our guests defy stereotypes, define practice, and disrupt convention.
We highlight the breadth and depth of nursing influence on society by amplifying nurses who are pushing boundaries and breaking down barriers to build a new paradigm.
I really think that every nurse is a leader. Every nurse can lead right where they are with the patients that they're with, the families they're with, their colleagues. And if those colleagues be in the nursing profession or in another healthcare profession, we can lead. We can be good people in those moments, right? We can be moral nurses in those moments. And I think that's what leadership is all about.
In this episode of Amplify Nursing, we talk with Mark Lazenby, Dean of the UC Irvine School of Nursing, as he reflects on his journey from philosophy scholar to oncology nurse practitioner and academic leader. Drawing from his work as an educator, clinician, and author of Caring Matters Most and Toward a Better World, he discusses leadership through the lens of trustworthiness, relational care, honesty, and ethics, and explores how nursing can help create a more compassionate and equitable healthcare system. All right, Mark, thank you so much for coming to speak with us today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
I really appreciate it. So this season on the podcast, we're talking about leadership, and as the Dean of the nursing school at UC Irvine, I thought you would be a perfect person to talk about it. So if you don't mind, could you talk just a little bit about, just to give some context, how you got into nursing and how you ended up where you are now?
Yeah, well, I will, but that story has to include you for people to know that you took my ethics course when I was on the faculty at Yale, and you were doing your DMP there, and hence your shirt. So I started out my life in Southern California, out in a very small rural farming town on the Colorado River. And it was a place to be from, in my opinion. So I got away from there very quickly and was the first in family to go to college and went on to grad school and really pursued a degree in philosophy because my way out of a life that I couldn't see for myself was the life of the mind. And so I really plunged into the life of the mind and got my PhD at Boston University in the philosophy of religion and got my first book published in that and was teaching at a small liberal arts regional college in suburban Philly and loving it. Meanwhile, my mother was back in that small rural farming town dying of cancer and had a really horrible experience. Not just the lack of culturally competent care, though her culture and religion were different from providers, but it was the lack of access. She had to go 2 hours one way just to get access to an oncologist, just to get access to basic chemotherapy. And actually what ended up killing her was that she was given the FOLFIRI regimen for colorectal cancer. And the I in FOLFIRI, for those cancer nurses out there, is irinotecan. And some people who have a certain mutation, irinotecan can cause really uncontrolled diarrhea. And she got that and developed a fistula and became septic, died in the ICU in DIC, in disseminated intravascular coagulation, just because she couldn't get access to care from just a basic reaction to a chemotherapy. That had she been at Penn or at Yale or at UC Irvine, we would have noticed it right away, stopped the chemotherapy, gotten her on antidiarrheals, and and fixed it, right? Extended her life or given her at least quality of life. So that was a major moment in my life to think that what am I doing as a philosopher talking about what the good life is when people can't live the good life. I was already at Yale at the time at the Divinity School, a mentor, Margaret Farley, who wrote a little book called Compassionate Respect, told me that if I was going to work in this space of healthcare equity, before we even used that term, I needed to go become a clinician myself. Like all of our students who say, my family member was in the hospital and it was a nurse who made a difference, that was me. My mother was in the ED and a nurse came and she said to me and my siblings, if this were my mother, I wouldn't want her to be like this. Because we didn't know what DIC was. We didn't know what decerebral posturing was, but she had both. And that nurse walked us through the dying process. And yeah, so that nurse gave me the call to become a nurse. And so I stayed on at Yale and went through their program and then continued both on the nursing school faculty and the divinity faculty for a good decade more until I went on to be an academic leader. So that's how I came into nursing. And I am an oncology nurse practitioner.
That's a really phenomenal and inspirational story. And how does that impact how you lead?
Yeah. Well, I think it keeps in front of me the real the fundamental issues of nursing, that as nurses we are really called, and I'll use that term even in a non-religious sense, like our professional duty is to care for the most vulnerable. And we all have vulnerabilities. Every human does. To be alive is to be vulnerable. But some people are healthier than others. And as nurses, we're called to help those who are less healthy and to help them become healthier. Or if they're sick, to restore them to health if they can be restored. And if not, to give them a peaceful death. And that classic definition of nursing, I just relied on Virginia Henderson's definition. The unique function of the nurse is to care for the patient or the individual, to restore their health, to restore or promote their health, or to lead to a peaceful death. That sticks with me all the time. It's like, what's our North Star for a school of nursing or just as an individual nurse? And it comes back to that, and that experience of vulnerability and nursing being there in that moment.
Being in an academic leadership position, I imagine you spend a lot of time with other leaders in different academic disciplines.
Yeah.
How do you feel your nursing lens helps you to see things that maybe other leaders don't?
I think nurses are always looking for the underdog, right? We're always looking for the most vulnerable or the most oppressed. And maybe I see, like, when I'm with my fellow deans in the provost meeting once a month, I think I tend to speak out more for the underdog. But nursing's relational, right? At its heart, it's relational. And there is great pressure in higher ed these days, particularly for leadership to be kind of transactional about budgets, about making sure the school is financially sound. And those are very important parts of my job. But I'm also concerned about the relational. How does the nursing school relate to the humanities school? And can we find a way to say that we're not separate? It's so easy for nursing in a higher ed setting at Penn, at Yale, at Irvine to think of that professional school over there that does that thing as if it's separate from the life of the university. And I want to say no. We're all doing this together. We're all educating the next generation of citizens. We're all educating the next generation of leaders. We have different disciplines, but how we can relate to that mission also is one of my concerns. So I think I'm a bit more relationally oriented than transactionally oriented because I'm a nurse.
Thinking about how you were responding to that question, I can definitely see how in my different administrative roles I've felt the same way. Making it more relationally centered rather than transactional.
Yeah, but I don't want to say that all nurses are by nature of being a nurse relational. No, I mean some are
Agreed.
far more transactional. I
Yeah.
am saying that I think our profession calls us, sort of demands of us to be concerned about relationships. It's hard sometimes, right? Because there are times when you want to be competitive. Like I want that dollar more than I need it more than you do, right? Or something like that. And I think leadership is setting aside that for a moment and seeing how can I care for my other deans or the provost or the president or whoever. How can I be in a caring relationship with them in such a way that both our boats can rise? I think the one thing I've learned is being competitive eventually does harm as
Mhm.
a leader. And here I go to some of the more current work by the social psychologists. One of them is at Berkeley. His name is Dacher Keltner, who talks about all boats rising, that it's important for us to think about how we can relate to each other in ways that are mutually beneficial. And society has evolved over time to do that because it's better for us if we all live rather than just one hogging the food, that we all share the food and we all live because we'll together get more food. And I think I've come to that approach in my leadership style.
I think that I definitely saw that when I was with you in class. I
Mm,
think that was something that we all recognized in what you are asking us to do. There were clinician and an educator, but in our group of people, we have many very high level leaders.
yeah.
And the time that we spent with you had a really profound effect, I think, on all of us. We discussed it. We're still a pretty tight group. We were all texting yesterday, as a matter of fact. We've had many conversations about the impact that your thoughts and what you taught us in class has had
Mhm.
on all of our careers and how we make decisions and approach things.
Well, let me say thank you, but I remember your cohort very well, and of course, there's also a phenomenon at Yale, and I'm sure you have it at Penn too. You attract some of the brightest and the best, and by brightest, I don't mean just necessarily intellectually smart. I mean people who want to do good with their lives, and you all are bright. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I feel like I'm in really good company with that group. Would it be okay if we talk a little bit about your book,
Sure.
Caring Matters Most? This was something that, I read years ago when it first came out and recently came across it again, which inspired me to reach out and talk to you about leadership
Mm.
and things like that. So, what do you think about the context of some of the concepts you talked about in the book? Trustworthiness, creating a healthy space, dignity, beauty. How do you
Yeah.
look at leadership through those lenses?
Thanks for that question. I'm gonna respond first with something I didn't write in that book, and maybe I wrote it in the sequel to it, but I'm not sure. And it's something it's a saying that's not unique to me. I heard it from Judith Krause, who was a long time dean at Yale School of Nursing and is still a mentor. And Judy says that the most important tool of leadership is the leader, him or herself, right? So it's who you are as a person. And and I think in the book that you're referring to, Caring Matters Most, I was trying to argue that the profession of nursing has a moral character, but that moral character has to be developed in individual nurses. And I get there by talking about the basic word ethics. Now, in Aristotle, in the Greek, ethics meant habits. And still, if you are going to translate Aristotle, it's best to translate the Greek word for ethics as habits. So, what kind of habits are you going to develop in yourself? If the best tool of leadership is the leader, what kind of habits do that leader need to have? So, that's what I started pursuing. And let's just take trustworthiness for a little bit and talk about it. And then we can talk about other habits that I write about. But trustworthiness, I think we find ourselves in society today with a huge, what people say is a huge problem of trust. And just look at what's going on in the world as we are recording this and talking. You honestly don't know if you can trust what someone is saying. And you can't trust motives. I mean, you just don't seemingly know what they are. So that's always kind of been true, but it's never truer than today. And I had to get away from the idea of trust because it's so slippery. You don't know, right, when you can trust someone. And then you go to, well, what's behind trust? It's that someone is trustworthy. And the philosopher I use there is a British philosopher named Honora O'Neill, and she's written about trustworthiness, and it has three basic components. One is competence, and as a leader, you do need to be competent. So, how does competence look in leadership? It doesn't necessarily mean to me that you have to know the latest management theories. What I think it means is that you've got to be willing to learn as you're doing, to accept criticism, to have a mentor, to always be engaged in the process of self-education. And I think that's what we mean about it in nursing too. You do have to have this basic competence, but as you all know, when we graduated from nursing school, we were not competent to go in and be a nurse. We gained that over time in our practice by being mentored as a new nurse and then taking on increasing responsibilities and this and that. I think that's what we do in leadership too. Then the second criteria of trustworthiness is reliability. I kind of like this one almost the best. Do you show up every day? You know, do you, when you say you're going to do something, do you do it? Just very basic principles that we try to teach our children. I think they are so true for leadership. You know, there's nothing that will break trustworthiness more than not being reliable. You can almost forgive incompetence sometimes because you say, oh, that person just needs a little more time to learn, needs a little more mentorship. But reliability, like, no, if you say you're going to do it, do it. That's a you decision. If you're going to show up, show up. I say you're going to show up, show up. Then the third criterion in trustworthiness is honesty. And it's kind of related to reliability, but Honora O'Neill says that at times we can be honest without giving the whole truth. And it's, you can come up with an example. Did you eat all the jelly beans this last weekend? Jelly beans in our house. No, but there's only one left. Yeah, I ate them all but that one, right? So it's not completely honest. So she says it's the absence of deception. You're not out to try to deceive anybody. And I think what is really shaken us to our core in this nation right now is that we all have this sense that we're being deceived, that there's something that we don't know that we should know. And as a leader, I think the people you lead should know everything you know, right? Maybe not in all the detail that you know it, right? But there should be no deception. If a school is running a deficit, a leader needs to be honest about that. If a school is running a surplus, a leader needs to be honest with that. And I go to budget because that's where, if I think about faculty relations with leadership, it's, do we have the money for this? Right? I thought we had the money for this. A leader just needs to be completely honest. And I don't mean transparent, because there are times when you shouldn't know what, like personnel issues or other things that you just, that are private between two different individuals. But there should be no deception. I think that's super key in leadership. So let's take that trustworthiness as a habit. And I broke it down into three kind of behaviors. That's the leader working on himself or herself as a tool. And I tell you, every day I think about those three things. And there are some days when I know I'm not competent. And I'm like, okay, I got to learn this. There are some days, like, you can hear the little sickness. I was going to show up, but I had to say, I can't. I'm sick, right? That's reliability. When it comes to matters of the school, anything that can be made public, I make it public. There's no reason to deceive. And I think those are the kind of habits, the kind of ethical way of being for a leader that we need to talk about more and more. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you. I think they're great examples of actionable things that leaders can do to make a better environment all around, because when you lead in such a way, you're leading by example, right? So then it's setting the baseline for what the expectation is for everyone else in the building.
Yeah. One of the nurse leaders I know and admire got her start in leadership by managing an OR. She's since risen to be the CNE of a major academic health system. But I watched her as the manager of that OR, and she managed in much the same way that I'm talking about. She developed competence when she didn't have it. She did something when she said she was going to do it. And she was the epitome of honesty, but not over disclosing. Right. Yeah. And I think in any form of leadership, these apply.
Yeah, I guess that's the sweet spot, is figuring out the oversharing
Yeah.
versus, being open, but not, you know, a complete open book.
Yeah, people talk a lot about transparency, and I think it might be worthwhile just to linger on this for a little bit, because I don't know that we know what we mean by transparent. We really don't want somebody to tell us everything that they're thinking, right? That's not, that can be harmful at times. But I think what we're trying to get at when we talk about transparency is that we don't want to be in a situation where we feel like we should have known this before now, right? And we've all been there. Like, oh, like in a nursing unit, oh, there have to be layoffs and you're laying me off, right? You didn't see this coming, right? Yeah, they saw it coming, right?
Mhm.
So how not to deceive people, right? That's the most important thing.
I feel like one of the things that I've noticed, probably more in my clinical life, so much so than here, is people not willing to just say, we're not going to entertain that. You know what I mean? When it comes to making clinical decisions
Mm,
about unit-based resources or things like
right.
that. And I feel like that's part of being transparent too. Like
Yeah.
saying we have the money, but we're not using it for that. We're going to use
Yeah.
it for something else because we feel like this is a priority.
No, absolutely right. I mean, you can give a very practical example, or, I'll use your area of specialty. We need another CRNA. We're strapped. I can't do these many cases in a day, and I know you've got the money to hire another one. And, so what you're conveying and what the person's conveying in that moment is need, and as well as, limits of resources, internal or the departmental resources. But management then do need to say why they're not going to do that if they're not going to do it. And as you the way you put it was they have other priorities. And you may not have known those priorities. And when you know them and there's a rationale given for them, you may agree. Hopefully they'll address the overwork situation, maybe not, but still there's got to be some reason, right? And I think that's what's that's what's built into this idea of don't deceive, right? Give us the reason why you're not going to do this.
We touched a little bit on this, and you mentioned that this book had a sequel.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it this the first one looked internal, and then the next one looked external. What does the profession of nursing do for society? How do we make a good society? I think it's doing pretty much like what we're talking about. Instead of the kind of habits of the nurse staying within the profession or within the individual, how do we live them at larger and use what's the best of nursing to create a better world? And so that's what it's called, Toward a Better World, the social significance of nursing. And the inspiration for these two books was that the founder of Yale School of Nursing, Annie Goodrich, she collected her speeches together in a volume that she called The Ethical and Social Significance of Nursing. So I wanted to bring that up from the 1920s to the 2020s, as it were, the 20 teens and 2020s, to say, what does nursing speak to us now? What's its message to us now? And I will say that in the sequel, I make a case for peace that I do, and this is quite relevant today as a war rages on that's not been approved by Congress, etc. I say that nursing is the opposite of war. And and if you think about it for a moment, it really is, right? We as nurses, we bind wounds. We heal, we mend broken hearts. It's funny, but when we were still living in Connecticut, the neighbor kid came to talk to me after a breakup because I was a nurse, right? And so we mend broken hearts. You've done it a lot of times in the hospital, and as a palliative care MP, oncology MP, I'm that, at the time of death, there are a lot of broken hearts, and we stitch things back together. We promote wholeness, and so I I encourage us as a profession to look at how that speaks to society much broader than our profession and much broader than just our patients, right? What becomes incumbent on us to do outside our professional lives? And peace is one of those stances I take.
I think it's a pretty solid place to start.
Yeah, I think leaders too. I hear some leaders say, "Oh, that's not a hill I want to die on," and I like leadership's not a battle, right? It's not a war we're engaging in, and we're not leading our troops into battle as nurse leaders. And would rather think of our leadership as how can we mobilize people to do what's right in the situation. And there are some situations like where we don't think we should engage. That's fair. But and so rather than say that's not a hill I'm going to die on, I say let's not engage, right? But let's find a place where we can engage and can make a difference. One of those places for me certainly is the promotion of our profession.
Say more about that.
I'm sure a lot of nurses are worked up, as I am worked up, by nursing being left off the list of graduate professional of professions eligible for graduate professional loans. Yeah, I don't know why it was. We can speculate all we want, but I know that it matters. And it matters not just for the future of healthcare, because nurses do need to go back to graduate school and become advanced practice nurses and become leaders and become nurse scientists. The healthcare needs us, but it also matters for the status of our profession. So the AACN had Hill Day last week, and I went. And of course, I had to go because I'm at a public university now. I had to go with our government affairs team. And rather than talk about all of the issues that our professional society, the AACN, wanted me to talk about, I talked about the graduate professional loans program and nursing, and advocated. And advocacy is another sort of bigger habit that I think we as a profession, need to exhibit to make the world a better place. And went to every Congress member for Southern California and talked about the importance of our profession. So I think it matters for us as nurses and as nurse leaders how seriously we take our profession, right? And how much we're going to be that tool that the profession needs us to be.
It's such a challenging thing too when you're a leader in an organization and you have these two roles, right? You're the dean of the School of Nursing at a prominent public university, and then you're also a nurse. So straddling those two roles, I can imagine, can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge.
Yes. Yes. They can be a challenge, but I look at it as a benefit. I'm just going to say that the thing I miss the most in the straddle is that I don't get to be clinically active, because I think being clinically active, even if it's a half day a week, even if it's just in touching a patient now and then, there is something reaffirming about laying hands on the sick, right? Or laying hands on the well to keep them healthy. It's a kind of, in my language, it's a sacred moment that keeps your orientation correct as a leader. Now, I do go to the hospital a lot just to walk the halls and say, yes, this is why I'm here, right? This is why I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good grounding practice, I would imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you. I want to be very respectful of your time. I know that you're a very busy, very, very busy dean. So thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to add before we go?
It was such a delight to hear from you and to see that you're doing this podcast and what a leader you are. And there's nothing more gratifying. I know you see this in your own students when they pop up as leaders. And I really think that every nurse is a leader. Every nurse can lead right where they are, with the patients that they're with, the families they're with, their colleagues. And with those colleagues, be in the nursing profession or in another healthcare profession, we can lead. We can be good people in those moments, right? We can be moral nurses in those moments. And I think that's what leadership is all about.
Amplify Nursing is hosted by Dr. Angela Rosa DiDonato and Marion Leary and produced by the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. Music for the podcast was created by Harper Leary. The podcast is made possible by the Krista and Rich Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Follow us on Twitter at Penn Nursing. Until next time, keep pushing over, under, around, and through.